In this lesson, we'll explore how we can clone textures from one image to another to add veins, blotches, and other blemishes to the skin of our fantasy concept. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we're ready to start adding just some different elements into the skin here, some different textures. We want to add some veins, just some pits to the skin, maybe a few scales here and there. We basically want to remove the cleanliness of the skin as it is now. Now, as I mentioned in several lessons prior to this, I wanted to maintain the skin pores as we went. We didn't want to lose those because those are going to basically work with the textures that we add in. All right? And we're basically going to look at some different textures that we're going to be using as well. Now, before we even jump into adding these textures into the skin, we want to come over here to our Layers panel. And you'll notice we've got a new group, which I've titled Skin Texture. And again, we're starting with a new merged copy of the head containing all of the changes we've made so far. So the first thing I want to do is actually make a layer mask of the head. And this is going to prove useful as we add in these textures on different layers so they're not just all over the place and just really distracting us. So we're going to come to our merged copy layer here in our Skin Texture group. And I'm just going to right-click on the thumbnail itself. And in the drop-down, we're going to go to Select Pixels right here towards the top. So this basically selects all of the pixels that make up our head. Next, we're going to come to the bottom of the Layers panel, and you're going to see this little button down here. It looks like a rectangle with a circle in the center. So we'll just click on that, and that creates our layer mask. All right, so everything will be confined to the head from this point onward as long as we employ this layer mask on each additional layer that we use for a different texture. Okay, so we're going to start off by adding some veins onto our subject here, onto his head. We really want to add some nice veins to really add to just that kind of nasty look to his overall demeanor. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. Let's title it Veins. Okay, and now we're going to click on the thumbnail of the layer mask we created just right below. I'm going to hold down Alt and just drag that up, so we're just basically copying that layer mask up. Now, as we weave in these textures, I found that the overlay blend mode has worked very well for me in the past. So we're going to go ahead and explore what overlay does for us as we add in each one of these textures on each additional layer. And we may want to explore changing the opacity on a couple as well. Okay, so we're going to start with veins. Now let's have a look at the textures that we're going to be using. And this first one is what we're going to be using for some of our wider, kind of more gross looking veins. Now for each one of these textures, I basically label them as the material they're based off of and then what we're going to use them for. So in this case, stone_veins. All right. Now you'll notice that each one of these textures has been desaturated. We've taken all the color out. We really don't need that information, that color, to be brought into our skin. We just want to focus on the textures themselves. So just kind of the overall values of these textures, okay? Now, the second thing that we want to point out here is that I've basically flipped or rotated each one of these textures, each one of these images, to where the lighting basically resembles very closely to what we have here on our character concept. As we clone over these different textures, we want the shadows to basically match up. We don't want shadows coming from a different direction where it doesn't match with the lighting that's hitting our concept's face. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you plan on using textures, additional textures on your own project. Okay, so here we have just some we're going to be using for blotches, scales, pitted skin, and then a couple for veins. So let's go ahead and get started with these veins. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our clone stamp tool, and I'm just going to right click, bringing up our preset picker, and we're going to use a soft round brush. We may size it up just a little bit here. We're going to go to our brush panel, and let's go ahead and make sure we got shape dynamics and transfer turned on, okay? Just making sure we have the appropriate controls in place. All right. I'm just kind of repositioning this window here. And I'm going to start with this little area right here. That's just a really nice looking, kind of interesting shape that we have there. Just kind of those spidery looking veins. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Alt and just kind of sample over that area. And you can kind of see that we now have sampled from that specific area based off of our cursor's appearance. Now we can come over here to our image and you can see now a preview of that texture that we're going to add to the skin. Okay? And if at any point we can also resize our brush still while on this image. So now I'm just going to basically drop that texture on there, and we can see by using overlay how nicely it works in compared to any other blend mode. Now we could use soft light in this case, but I kind of feel like overlay really drops it in there nicely. All right, and so we can kind of continue to sample, coming back to our image here, just sample from different areas and just kind of start to work that in over our image here. Now, one thing to point out about adding textures to skin is it's very easy to get carried away and add just way too much to really overkill it. So you want to be subtle. I think subtlety is kind of a big trick to all this. Just kind of sampling from some different spots here, just trying to get a little bit of variety as we kind of work in these veins. Let's go ahead and kind of change gears. We'll come down here towards the cheeks area. We'll try this other stone texture. It also has some really nice spots in it as well that I really like. And so we may want to kind of work in just kind of some veins right there. And then we may want to have like a really kind of cool vein coming off the chin right there as well. So just kind of coming around different areas here. Periodically resampling just from different parts of the image. And I'm liking how those spots kind of drop in on the ear there. We may want to go back to our previous vein image and kind of work in some veins right there into the ears as well. So that's looking really cool. I'm liking where we're going with this. Let's move forward, and we're going to go ahead and make a new layer. We'll copy up that layer mask. All right. We're going to use overlay once again. And let's title this Pitted Skin. Okay, excellent. So let's go over here and we'll choose a different texture. So this is kind of what I plan to use for our pitted skin. Just kind of a real nasty looking texture. And I think it's going to work really nice on his skin. Okay. So we're once again using our clone stamp tool. We'll go ahead and just kind of sample just from some different areas of this texture, and then coming back to our image here, we can kind of start to work that in. Very nice, and you can just kind of see how those little indentations now appear in the skin. Very cool. And again, just kind of sampling from different areas of the image so we don't kind of have any kind of repetitive patterns appearing. And again, it's very easy to get carried away. So some of these we may want to kind of rein them in later on if they feel just a little bit too intense. Now some of these may be a bit intense. We can always play around with the opacity like I said earlier. We could always kind of bring the opacity down just a little bit just to kind of see how that's looking on that particular layer. So let's go ahead and move forward and let's experiment adding some blotches to his skin. So again, we'll make a new layer, copying up that layer mask. We're going to go with overlay again since it's been just really the most effective, and we'll just call this layer blotches. Okay, excellent. So just coming back over here to our textures, I think this will work nicely just for some blotches to add in. So just kind of some of these areas where we have some of these really deep little holes in this concrete. So again, just kind of sampling, just maybe from this little area right here, perhaps right here. Coming back to our image, and we can just kind of see how that looks. Very cool, loving it. We may want to reduce the size of our brush just a little. Just kind of see how some of these look. And again, it's like I've said, it's very easy to get carried away. I don't want to add a whole bunch of them all over the place. Textures look really cool. They add a lot to a picture, but at the same time, they can also become very distracting and take away what you're ultimately trying to present. All right, so that's looking pretty nice. And let's go ahead and finish out by adding in kind of some scales, kind of just a little bit of scaly skin here and there. And this is the one that we really want to be the most subtle with. Again, it could really overpower the overall image. So I just made a new layer. We'll copy up our layer mask. Set that to overlay as well. And let's go ahead and just title this scales. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and go to our next texture. And this is a great image. Again, we got a great matching of the lighting situation that's happening here. So we'll go ahead and just kind of sample from just kind of any area. And we'll just kind of come over here to our image. Might size up our brush just a little bit. And we'll just kind of work in some scales here and there. Kind of right here on the chin might be nice too. Just kind of right there. So little things like that, I think, really add a lot to the character. Go ahead and sample from another area. Again, I don't want any kind of repeated patterns. And we'll go ahead and kind of come over here to the cheek area. Kind of work in a little bit here on the head as well. And again, I don't want to cover up all those skin pores that I've spent so much time preserving, because they're really going to work well with these textures. If we have nothing but textures, it's going to just make the image feel a little bit weird looking. It's going to overpower the image. You're going to find yourself just looking at the textures, and it can actually flatten out the image if you're not careful. Just kind of working in some of these scales, and we can really kind of continue on refining, maybe going back and adding some of those little pitted elements as well from that other texture. So what we're going to do in the next lesson is continue on with this same process, and we'll focus on the neck. Remember, we have our neck down here towards the bottom in its own group, and we're going to basically create a layer mask for that, and basically explore adding just some textures to the neck as well. So stick around, and we'll see you in the next lesson.